Ei, som, testando. Ei, som, som. Som, ei, testando, som.
Criado pela Lei Federal 12.378 de 2010, o CAU Paraná é resultado de meio século de luta da categoria por um Conselho único em defesa da arquitetura e do urbanismo. O CAU surge com a função de fiscalizar o trabalho de profissionais e empresas para garantir que critérios de qualidade e de ética sejam respeitados em projetos e obras. O Conselho também tem a missão de orientar as atividades, além de criar normas que disciplinem o exercício da profissão. Ao lutar pelo aperfeiçoamento da arquitetura e do urbanismo, o Conselho garante mais segurança para a sociedade. Já para os arquitetos e urbanistas, o CAU é uma conquista que confere maior autonomia e representatividade.
O CAU Paraná existe para garantir que os arquitetos e urbanistas de nosso estado tenham a formação e habilitação necessárias para pensar, discutir e planejar as nossas cidades. Isto garante segurança para toda a sociedade.
Na fiscalização, profissionais do CAU Paraná vão até os canteiros de obras para orientar, educar e fiscalizar. Buscam garantir que os projetos e construções tenham profissionais habilitados e registrados junto ao Conselho. Para isso, o CAU também disponibiliza diversos canais de comunicação para receber denúncias de toda a sociedade. São ações que buscam valorizar o exercício da arquitetura e do urbanismo. Com sedes em Curitiba, Londrina, Maringá, Cascavel, Pato Branco e Guarapuava, o Conselho de Arquitetura e Urbanismo do Paraná atende anualmente mais de 17 mil profissionais cadastrados em todo o estado. Aqui também estão registradas cerca de 3 mil empresas. A plenária do CAU Paraná é composta por 40 conselheiros estaduais, entre titulares e suplentes. São profissionais que trabalham de forma voluntária nas diversas comissões da entidade. Outros 2 conselheiros federais se dedicam aos assuntos junto ao Conselho de Arquitetura e Urbanismo do Brasil, em Brasília. Embora seja uma autarquia federal, o Conselho não recebe recursos do governo. É financeiramente autossustentável, mantendo-se com a arrecadação de anuidades e taxas dos profissionais. O CAU Paraná tem orgulho da arquitetura e do urbanismo desenvolvidos em nosso estado.
O licenciamento, o estudo e a avaliação dos impactos ambientais são atribuições de arquiteto e urbanista. Este profissional considera o efeito social antes, durante e depois da execução de obras. Além de realizar um planejamento urbano adequado, o arquiteto e urbanista também desenvolve projetos sustentáveis e que respeitam os recursos naturais. A arquitetura e o urbanismo transformam os espaços urbanos e promovem a harmonia entre a natureza e as construções. É a preservação do meio ambiente. Acesse o site e siga as redes sociais do CAU Paraná.
Muito boa noite, senhoras e senhores. Em nome do Conselho de Arquitetura e Urbanismo do Paraná, que por meio da sua Comissão Especial de Política Urbana e Ambiental, a CPUA, organizou este evento, queremos agradecer as presenças de todas e de todos, hoje e durante todo o seminário. Por 3 dias de intensa programação, os participantes do Seminário Internacional Renaturalização das Cidades e Redução da Crise Socioambiental, do Brasil e do exterior, puderam discutir a reconexão das cidades do século XXI com a natureza, além de debater políticas públicas para o enfrentamento das desigualdades sociais e injustiça ambiental frente ao cenário de mudanças climáticas. O Seminário Internacional Renaturalização das Cidades e Redução da Crise Ambiental contou com os apoios da ABAP, Associação Brasileira dos Arquitetos Paisagistas, do IAB Paraná, Instituto de Arquitetos do Brasil, Departamento do Paraná, da Associação Brasileira de Escritórios de Arquitetura, Seção Paraná, a ASBEA Paraná, do SINDARC Paraná, Sindicato dos Arquitetos e Urbanistas do Estado do Paraná, da ABEA, Associação Brasileira do Ensino da Arquitetura, e da FENEA, Federação Nacional dos Estudantes de Arquitetura. Também foi fundamental o apoio do Museu Oscar Niemeyer, que novamente recebeu o CAU Paraná neste espaço que representa uma verdadeira celebração da melhor arquitetura brasileira já produzida. Queremos registrar e agradecer as participações dos conselheiros e conselheiras do CAU durante todo o evento. E chamamos agora o presidente do CAU, Milton Carlos Zanelato, para suas considerações.
Boa noite a todos. Antes de proferir, só uma questão uniforme, a próxima palestra será em inglês, então quem precisar do tradutor tem ali fora, é só pegar. Então, enquanto a gente vai dando início, quem precisar pode ir lá. Boa noite a todos, muito obrigado pela presença de todos, é uma enorme satisfação estar aqui neste encerramento de um seminário extremamente importante para nós. Não posso deixar de agradecer a toda a CPUA. O Ormy vai ter uma responsabilidade muito grande de conseguir sintetizar tudo que foi discutido e apresentado numa carta sucinta para que a gente possa, inclusive, encaminhar as autoridades, poder público, universidades, academia, pesquisadores, e, inclusive, levar para o Congresso Mundial da UIA, que será realizado agora em Copenhague. Para nós é uma satisfação muito grande de poder abordar um tema. Hoje no almoço conversávamos como a gente esperava talvez há 30 anos atrás, quando olhássemos para hoje, imaginando o futuro, talvez não estivéssemos imaginando que estaremos discutindo isto agora. Há cerca de 30 anos atrás passamos por uma COP92, tivemos diversos acordos na época, bastante discussão sobre o meio ambiente, sobre a importância. Em um determinado momento isto caiu de pauta. Outras coisas sobre o mundo moderno, globalização, comércio, negócios, multinacionais, petróleo, entrou e acabou levando esta pauta de arrasto, como se o meio ambiente não fosse dar as respostas para a nossa negligência. E aqui nós tivemos no seminário a oportunidade justamente de ver as consequências dessa negligência, que poderiam ter sido, no mínimo, muito bem mitigadas e talvez até neutralizadas, se lá em 92, quando a gente entendeu a importância disso, se a gente tivesse tomado as atitudes corretas. Pois bem, a gente já chegou a discutir recentemente se a Terra é plana ou não faz, dá para se entender por que o meio ambiente caiu de pauta, né? Se a gente teve que discutir que ciência, de fato, pesquisa, faz, produz, e não é simplesmente empírico, né? A gente houve um período aí, talvez, que os historiadores vão ter dificuldade de explicar o porquê, depois de tanta produção de conhecimento, de tantas coisas óbvias, a gente teve que reafirmar o que era óbvio. E aqui, com a nossa questão, não é nem um pouco diferente. Quando a gente fala de renaturalização de cidades, quando a gente fala sobre o combate à crise socioambiental, são coisas que, infelizmente, já estão na pauta há muito tempo, mas durante muito tempo está sendo ignorada. Então, com misto de felicidade de poder estar aqui num momento desse, de retomar essa discussão e entender que a gente, de fato, tem que tomar atitudes agora cada vez mais agressivas, mais rápidas. O que antes lá atrás a gente podia ir com pequenos, como foi comentado, um beija-flor tacando uma gotinha para apagar um incêndio, agora já não temos mais tempo disso. Ou a gente coloca hidrantes e todo o aparato, ou o incêndio vai literalmente nos matar. E o caso, inclusive, apresentado no Chile mostrou que, de fato, o incêndio provocado pelo homem, se não me falha, acho que 93% que o Ivan trouxe de dados são incêndios com causas humanas. Por isso que não é considerado incêndio desastre natural, porque é uma ação do homem na Terra. Então, para a gente, esse seminário é um marco importante. Tivemos presenças brilhantes, não só nas mesas, quanto na plateia, que nos honraram muito com a presença, e tenho certeza que tudo que foi debatido aqui vai reverberar em nossa sociedade. Então, para nós, CAU Paraná, É uma honra poder participar desse debate, poder sediar aqui em Curitiba um debate desta magnitude. Eu já falei demais, eu sempre me empolgo demais, ainda mais é um tema que a gente tem, nós arquitetos, muito carinho sobre isso. E nós teremos ainda, para finalizar, ainda uma brilhante palestra com o Timothy e, obviamente, com a mediação ainda mais brilhante da nossa eterna presidente da BAP, a qual nos auxiliou, inclusive deixo aqui meu agradecimento à BAP e a todas as demais entidades que apoiaram, acreditaram e participaram conosco neste evento. Uma boa noite, muito obrigado, um bom evento a todos.
Muito obrigado ao presidente Milton. E queremos lembrar que todos, pedimos que todos acessem as redes sociais do CAU no perfil CAU-PR oficial. Convidamos agora a ex-presidente da BAP, a arquiteta Luciana Schenck, que vai fazer a apresentação do nosso palestrante e a mediação.
Boa noite a todas e todos. É uma honra estar aqui, eu agradeço o convite, as palavras. Bom, a natureza é um conceito que tem diferentes definições através da história. A natureza, para os clássicos gregos e romanos, estávamos completamente conectados a ela, para essa cultura. Não havia separação. Essa não era, inclusive, uma questão para eles, para a cultura antiga. A ideia de que a natureza restaura é clássica. Essa ideia de que a gente é consolado pela natureza, ela é muito antiga, com A maiúsculo. A separação aconteceu a partir de diferentes fontes ou formas. Em primeiro lugar, para autores como Lenoble, surgiu a partir das religiões monoteístas, que acreditam que Deus criou todas as coisas para a sua mais importante criação, o homem, depois a mulher. Mas o ponto alto dessa separação reside no nascimento da ciência e filosofia modernas, com René Descartes. Ali, de modo crescente, a natureza e o mundo serão tornados objetos. Esse processo tomou quase 300 anos para transformar a montanha em mercadoria, minério de ferro. Durante esse tempo, o que aconteceu com a relação entre a humanidade e a natureza? Nós perdemos nossa capacidade de nos reconhecermos natureza. Timothy BEATLEY é um desses autores que nos fazem lembrar desse vínculo fundamental. Nosso convidado desta noite, que vai participar remota e diretamente do estado da Virgínia, nos Estados Unidos, é o professor Timothy BEATLEY. Ele é graduado em Planejamento de Cidades pela Universidade da Virgínia, tem mestrado em Planejamento Urbano pela Universidade de Oregon e em Artes e Ciências Políticas pela Universidade da Carolina do Norte. É PhD em Cidades e Planejamento Regional pela mesma universidade. O professor Timothy BEATLEY atua no Departamento de Planejamento Urbano e Ambiental da Escola de Arquitetura da Universidade de Virgínia, onde leciona há mais de 25 anos. Grande parte do trabalho de Timothy BEATLEY se concentra na temática da biofilia, comunidades sustentáveis e estratégias criativas através das quais cidades podem reduzir fundamentalmente seus impactos e as suas pegadas ecológicas. Ao mesmo tempo, se tornarem lugares mais habitáveis, justos e igualitários. O professor apresenta uma perspectiva na qual cidades sustentáveis e resilientes representam nossa melhor alternativa e esperança para enfrentar os desafios atuais. Com vocês, o professor. Muito obrigada.
Okay. Very good. Hello, everybody. It's great to be with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you can see that. That you've seen my first slide, biophilic cities. Alan, can you confirm that everything is okay and you can see the screen? Okay, great. Well, feel free to interrupt me along the way if something happens. But I'm very happy to be with you, at least remotely. I wish I could be there in person, and I'm so happy you are spending time thinking about, talking about how we renaturalize cities. It's such an important topic and important subject. So I think I have about an hour or so, and I am going to just quickly run through some slides, tell you a little bit about this idea of biophilic cities, a little bit about our biophilic cities network, which is a global network of cities, and give some examples and tell a few stories about what some of our cities are doing. So to begin, for me, the concept of biophilia is really important and really central. And so about 10 years ago or so, we started something called the Biophilic Cities Project here at the University of Virginia. Here you see a definition, one of the definitions of E.O. Wilson, the idea that we are hardwired, that we have this innate desire to connect with nature, to be around nature, to affiliate with nature. I won't read this entire quote. E.O. Wilson, who passed away not long ago, I think at the age of 92, and he wasn't the first person to use the word biophilia, but he is really the one that has coined it in the way that we think of it today, this innate connection or way in which we want to be and are drawn to nature. So we believe that cities today and in the future have to incorporate nature. Nature can't simply be an afterthought. It can't be optional. It has to be absolutely essential. It is absolutely essential to leading a happy, healthy, and meaningful life. And so I think for most of us, when you think about the things in the world, think about the things in our lives that give us pleasure and delight and meaning. Often for me anyway, I will speak, it is the things in nature, the things you see on the screen, living creatures, birds and butterflies, but flowers and trees, and of course water, the sight of water, the sound of water. These are things that we know intuitively we enjoy, we're drawn to. We want to engage in a life full of these natural experiences. Increasingly there is so much evidence coming out of the literature, coming out of the research areas of environmental psychology and public health and medicine and urban planning and economics. This is just one example of a bioscience study that shows the relationship between the greenness of a neighborhood, the presence of birds and shrubs and trees, that where you have more of those natural elements, you see less depression, less anxiety, lower levels of stress. So not perhaps a big surprise that when we have nature around us, we function better, we're more relaxed, we're less stressed. There is a power in a walk in nature. We know from all of the work in Japan around forest bathing, where as you walk through that forest with the dappled light and the sounds of birds and the smells and the inhaling of aerosols, that at the end of that walk, not a surprise again, that the research shows that our stress hormone levels go down, that we get a boost to our immune system from that walk in the forest. And the Japanese, of course, are so convinced about this that they've established a network of forest bathing stations to allow for this experience of walking in a forest. And increasingly, I am thinking about trees and forests and cities, and we want to have many opportunities for experiences of forest bathing. But all of these stresses, we know that nature is uniquely suited to responding to them. And some of the new evidence is quite intriguing and quite clever. This is a study from last year, a study from Belgium that shows the relationship between the size of trees and the size of tree canopy and tree crowns, and the sales of medications for mood disorders and for cardiovascular disease. So the larger the trees, the more present there are, the greater the number of trees, and the greater the crown size, the lower the levels of the sales of these medications. So it's correlation, not causation, to be sure, but the evidence to me is accumulating and very compelling. So that when we think about what can we do in cities that will address so many things at once, this tree, this large tree, especially protecting those large older trees in cities, is really important, and they do such disproportionate work for us in so many ways, sequestering carbon and cooling those urban environments. Exactly why nature has these effects on us is not entirely clear. Again, we believe it is that coevolution with nature. The presence of natural shapes and forms, and in particular fractals. Fractals are these self-repeating shapes in nature that branch or that bow of a tree is a small version of the larger tree, that we see these self-repeating fractal shapes in so much of nature. And Richard Taylor, who studies fractals at the University of Oregon, has coined this term fractal fluency, and the idea that the human species has developed a visual system to effortlessly process those fractal shapes. So it's, again, not surprising that some of our most delightful, pleasant, relaxing experiences have to do with being around nature and seeing nature and looking at trees, looking at clouds and water and shorelines, all these places where we have such high fractal density. So if you had to summarize all of the research, it's very difficult because there is so much of it, and that's impressive, again, in how it's accumulating, but all the things on the right side of this slide are connected with or associated with the presence of nature. So again, lower levels of depression and anxiety, lower levels of stress, improved mood, improved happiness, greater physical activity. We know the greener the environment, the more natureful the environment, the more likely we are to be walking in it and getting physical exercise that in turn helps to make us healthier. But things that may be a little surprising, in American cities, research shows that where we plant trees and we renaturalize urban settings, that gun violence goes down. We see lower levels of crime. We see reductions in social isolation, which is really important. We have evidence now that in the presence of nature, we are more likely to be generous. We're more likely to be cooperative. A lot of evidence that we're more likely to be creative. So all of these things together suggest maybe that we are going to be better human beings, I would argue, when we have more nature around us. And I'm frequently summarizing a lot of this with the use of the word flourishing. I really like the word flourishing. It captures the pleasures and delights of having nature around us, but it also captures the sort of deeper connections to nature, deeper meaning in life, and so flourishing, I think, is a good word. We want cities that facilitate flourishing. So we have collectively, as a planet, gone through a tough several years during the pandemic, and this does have some bearing on nature, of course, and as terrible as the global pandemic has been, and the high loss of life and ways in which it has uprooted a lot of lives, if there is a silver lining, it is the reconnection to nature. Nature has been this thing that has helped us get through it. It has been a saving grace, a source of constancy in a way, in a very difficult time. So are we looking at the environment, looking at nature in different ways? I think we are. These are images actually from two of our partner cities in the Biophilic Cities Network. The image on the left is from Portland, Oregon, and one of their largest parks called Forest Park. We were tracking the changes that cities were making in real time to facilitate connections to nature, to make it easier for residents during the pandemic to enjoy a park or to be outside, to be strolling in nature. And so for Portland and Forest Park, they converted all of these pathways into one-way trails to maximize the numbers of people who could enjoy that nature. I hope that as we continue to get beyond the pandemic, it's still, of course, certainly a worry, and we think about the next pandemics. We remember the ways in which nature helped us get through it and helps us to forestall or prevent future pandemics even. I have a particular interest in birds, and it's been very interesting to watch how during periods of lockdown, when people had to be inside, that they began to appreciate the sight of birds and the sounds of birds, bird song. We have a lot of evidence about the therapeutic value of bird song. And so we saw for the first time for many people, they were watching birds, bird watching, counting birds, putting up bird feeders. And we know from evidence about the numbers of people visiting websites and purchases of bird feeders and things like that, we've literally hatched a new generation of bird lovers. And so I hope that will continue. Those people who began to appreciate that nature continue to enjoy that nature and believe it to be important in the months and years ahead. It's really interesting how right now there's a lot of resistance to returning to the conventional office settings where many of us worked before the pandemic. And many of you know, I think, in the US at least, in American cities, office space is now at about 50% occupancy compared to what it was before the pandemic. Where are we working? Where do we want to work? I think nature will figure into that in a big way in the future. And hopefully some of that work, a lot of that work will happen in the forest, out in the park, in the nature around us. I think we will be happier and we will be more productive. By the way, this is an image from our friends at an organization called Nature Desks, based in the Netherlands, and they have been promoting for a number of years now something called the International Outdoor Office Day, which was June 15th. That was one day when everyone is encouraged to take their work outside and do what this person is doing. But we're going to see, I think, continue to see a transformation in how we work with considerable implications for cities and the conversion maybe of some of that office space to housing and other uses, and on a greater importance again given to the time we spend outside in a way outside that conventional office. We like to say that a biophilic city is a resilient city, that just about anything that you can do to make that city more natureful will also help a city respond to all of the other pressures and struggles, particularly around adaptation to climate change. This is an image from Rotterdam, where they are having to manage water, rainwater, flood water, sea level rise from the North Sea. And increasingly that means subsidizing the installation of green roofs. It means water plazas or water squares, as one image here shows, designing new spaces for being outside, but also incorporating nature into that and adapting and creating, designing the space for multiple purposes. So water square is intended to be new public space, but it's also designed to absorb, to retain and hold rainwater. So it does multiple things. By the way, going back to the slide about working outside, this is a real challenge right now here in the U.S. You probably know that we've been experiencing multiple days of terrible air quality here, and I can't really show you a picture outside my window at the moment, but it's pretty dark, and high levels of particulates that are coming in from smoke coming in from the wildfires in Canada. So an impact of climate change is actually making it harder to enjoy nature in many cities. So it's kind of a perverse thing that we at once we know we need nature, we need trees and forests, and we need to recommit to nature in response to climate change. But at the same time, that will be harder. It certainly will make being outside, at least in the summer months in this part of the world, more difficult. Okay, but biophilic cities are resilient cities. So we have seen a remarkable growing interest in incorporating nature into design at every level of cities. Many of you know about the biophilic design movement. It's largely been about rethinking the architecture of buildings and the interior spaces of buildings. This is one example of a cancer center actually in Toronto. Typhero Architects do these wonderful buildings that incorporate living nature. You see the trees, but it's also cross-laminated timber, mass timber design structures that, in this case, mimic a forest. So you walk into this lobby and it very much feels like you're in a natural forest. Well, our friend and colleague Stephen Keller, who's passed away now, but is in some ways, was one of the most important thinkers and writers around biophilic design, came up with this framework of elements and attributes. I don't have time to go through all of this, but these 6 categories: environmental features, natural shapes and forms, natural patterns and processes, light and space, place-based relationships, evolved human-nature relationships. I've highlighted a few things. Clearly, a biophilic building is one that incorporates living nature, plants and water and animals, but also botanical motifs, and again the sort of references to nature. I mentioned fractals earlier. It's about bringing natural light into the interior spaces of building. It's also about connecting to a spirit of place or place attachments, the unique elements of place, and it's also about awe and wonder, and I want to circle back to that a little bit later. So we have so many wonderful new examples of biophilic buildings, and buildings that have been designed with really impressive natural elements. This is one example from Toronto called Designer's Walk, incorporating several hundred trees in this vertical tower. And the trees are designed into the floor plates of the building so that they are not an afterthought. They are very much a key element in the design of that structure. Another example is the Center for Sustainable Landscapes at the Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's a wonderful building. You see there's a public green roof on top. You have views of nature around you. Every workspace has a window that's operable and can be opened, and so where nature is sort of incorporated into the core design of this building. By the way, if I forget to say this, I'd love for you to look at our website, biophilic-cities.org. We have a lot of resources there. One of the things we've been doing in recent years is producing short documentary films about inspiring stories and inspiring projects like this building. So we have a 5 or 7 minute film about the Center for Sustainable Landscapes and a little bit more detail about what makes this building special. But we say that a biophilic city is certainly a city with lots of biophilic buildings, that every new building ought to be designed with nature at its center. But a biophilic city has to be more than just a collection of biophilic buildings. It's a city that thinks about the nature in a more holistic way, thinks about the nature beyond and between the buildings, thinks about nature certainly in parks, but beyond parks. And all the spaces in and around the city are opportunities for growing nature, for renaturalizing that urban environment. And these are cities that emphasize and prioritize the connection of residents to that nature around them. So it's about nature connections, about connecting residents to that nature, but to each other as well through that nature. We know that nature brings us together as human beings. It's also recognizing that cities play an important conservation role as we are in the middle of a biodiversity extinction crisis. Cities represent an opportunity to create spaces and places where other forms of life can inhabit those cities, and so there's an emphasis on the sharing of space with many other non-human forms of life, and we're frequently using the word coexistence and care for that nature. Coexistence in the sense that we actively plan to share the spaces in cities. I'll give some examples of that in just a second. So the cities in our network, and we have about 30 cities that have officially joined as partner cities now. Singapore, one of the original 10 cities, and many of our cities are pushing the envelope and thinking about their futures in ways that, again, go beyond just thinking about nature in places like a park. Parks are really important, but we want to move from seeing a city as a place that has discrete, designated places of nature to beginning to see that city as an ecosystem, which it is, and beginning to aspire to living in a city immersed in nature. So here you see a little bit about Singapore. This is what's become a very famous hotel, the Park Royal Hotel, designed by Woha. And Singapore has been known, of course, for many years as a garden city. More recently, it has changed its motto to a city in a garden, which seems like a small change, but really quite profound. And more recently, and in part because of the experience of the pandemic, they are now calling themselves a city in nature. So we don't want to live in a city, where we go to visit. We have to walk to the nature. We want to be the nature. We want to live. We want to be immersed in that nature, and we want to live in a way where we can overcome that sense of being separate from nature. So it isn't a perfect story in every city, in all of our partner cities, but I think that's the vision, that's the aspiration anyway. And by the way, Singapore has certainly been a model for thinking about how to implement this idea. So one of the things they have is a sort of regulatory system. It goes by the acronym LUSH. Part of that is a landscape replacement policy that when you build a building like this, you have to at least replace the nature lost at ground level 1-to-1 with nature in the vertical realm. So you see in this case, it's sky gardens and green roofs, and that's certainly been a big part of what Singapore has done, pioneering that sort of vertical nature. So if I had to summarize the key elements of this vision of biophilic cities, it's immersive nature, integrated, continuous, and seamless. Sometimes we talk about room or rooftop to region or bioregion and all those spaces in between. So a whole of city approach. It's also a whole of life approach in the sense that you, as a young person, as a child, in that city, you ought to have exposure to nature at a very early age and have that contact with nature, be immersed in that nature throughout your life, even into elderhood. So it is clearly about integrating built and natural systems. I mentioned, beyond parks. A lot of this certainly has to do with biodiversity. I've already mentioned that, biodiversity conservation, a sense of wildness in cities. That's really what's behind the motivation behind Singapore shifting its motto to a city in nature. Actually, during the pandemic, a lot of discussion about how the landscape was tended so carefully, like a garden. During the pandemic, it became wilder, and many residents liked that, and so it has set off a kind of a collective discussion about the importance of wildness. There's also a concern or importance given to equity and social justice. So we know, particularly in American cities, that nature is not evenly or fairly distributed, and neighborhoods of color have less nature generally, and that tends and forest canopy is lower in neighborhoods of color, underserved neighborhoods. This is a result of long-standing patterns of discrimination and spatial segregation, going back to our practices of redlining and racial covenants and so on. So it's a fairness. Everyone is deserving of nature. We believe nature is a birthright. Everyone needs it and needs it to be happy and healthy. It's a culture of biophilia, so it's not just the presence or absence of nature. How much do we care about that nature? How much do we know about it? Are we able to recognize common species of flora and fauna? Are we committed to helping restore or renaturalize those urban environments around us? So we have some impressive cities. Every city, all 30 cities in the network have their own individual pages on the biophiliccities.org page. So there's a lot more information about the things they're doing. There is no one template, and every city, will have a different set of circumstances, a different ecology, a different context, and will be able to do different things. And this is just a sampling of what some of our cities are doing. Everything from innovating new streetwalk or sidewalk gardens, thinking about accommodating the presence of wildlife like a mountain lion and mountain lions in Los Angeles. And other things, a wide range of different tools, different renaturalizing ideas and strategies and experiences, and it's quite impressive overall, and in many ways quite encouraging. So it again happens in little spaces, but also it can happen in larger regional strategies and regional green space networks. This is a story of, you see Jane Martin here from San Francisco, wonderful story there of empowering residents, in fact, to take up pavement, get a jackhammer, and actually take up that pavement in places where there's often too much paved surface, and plant gardens. So Jane Martin had a lot to do with creating a new kind of permit in the city, which makes it possible to easily get permission from the city to take up pavement and to plant a sidewalk garden. So they're actually called sidewalk landscape permits. And since 2006, there have been more than 2,000 of these permits issued. San Francisco has also been pioneering green rooftops. So we're thinking about, again, where are all those opportunities in the city to plant new green things and to renaturalize, and rooftops are a tremendous opportunity in most cities. San Francisco, one of several American cities now to mandate the installation of either a green roof or a solar roof or a combination of the two. And in fact, the idea of a bio-solar roof that combines solar panels, photovoltaic panels with a green or ecological roof it turns out to be an effective combination. And the evidence suggests that the green roof helps to keep the solar panels cooler and improve their production. And at the same time, the solar panels create spaces, shaded spaces and niches and different habitats on that green roof, so it can contribute to the biodiversity, to increasing the biodiversity of the green roof. So lots of really interesting strategies. It is about renaturalizing, regreening all those spaces, rooftops, backyards, roadways. It's also about thinking about how we move through a city and how we, again, back to this idea of immersive nature, how do we reach that green space? How do we move through the city in a way through a kind of totally renaturalized city where you're actually moving through that space? Again, back to the Japanese concept of forest bathing. A few examples of this, some of my favorite sections called the Southern Ridges, favorite section of Singapore's Park Connectors Network, which is now more than 350 kilometers. And so it takes you in this, along this elevated pathway through canopy, through tree canopy, and you really do feel immersed in that nature. Newer examples, Arlington, just outside Washington, D.C., another one of our partner cities, has just released a wonderful precinct plan, actually, that puts this idea of a green ribbon at the very center. So this is a connected network of biophilic walking paths. You see a little bit of a rendering there. So we want to imagine cities where we're outside, definitely, where we're moving through nature and experiencing nature at every point. Many of you know about the Amazon second headquarters in Arlington, and one of the more interesting buildings as part of that Amazon second headquarters is something they're calling the Helix, which is this really interesting building, spiral building that has a forested trail on the exterior of the building working its way up the building. And that trail, this building hasn't been built yet, but it will connect to ground level nature, and it will create a public hiking trail, essentially. So that's one of the things we're seeing in many cities, is beginning to connect the spaces and upper levels of the building, extending the High Line, for example, in New York, so that it connects actually with green rooftops. And you see the walking spaces like this one around a building that connect to ground level walking spaces, and you begin to see nature in this sort of three-dimensional, multiple vertical spaced kind of way. Biophilic, Pittsburgh is also in our Biophilic Cities Network. City of Pittsburgh I've mentioned already. Part of our agenda is about kind of reimagining a lot of things that we might tend to think of as only urban and not very ecological or not very natureful. But for Pittsburgh, the nature is trees and canopy, but it's connecting to water. It's reimagining everything in this picture, including things like a bridge. That bridge could be a nesting space for peregrine falcons. And so a lot of this agenda is about really reimagining what a city is. Every city will have its unique resources and attributes and stories. In Pittsburgh, one of the things that they have there that's quite unique, because it's a very hilly environment, they have this remarkable network of steps, or public steps, city steps, public stairways. This is the way, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this is the way that workers got from their hilltop neighborhood down to the steel factory on one of the rivers. And so there is a movement now to restore and rejuvenate this 850 sets of city steps, and they are an interesting asset to connect the residents to nature. So you can see a little bit of the nature, you have perspectives of the city, you have the ability to get into forest patches and to experience the nature of the city in very unique and special ways. By the way, we have a brand new 8 or 9 minute film about the Pittsburgh city steps, and I'd love for you to go to the biflexcities.org and watch that film. But these are, again, a story of mobility, of how pedestrians get around in a city, but also how they experience the wildness of a city. So wildness happens in lots of different ways. This is a wonderful story, another film we've made about Perth. Perth in Western Australia, and a conventional water feature in the city that has become converted into a native biodiverse wetland. Really wonderful story, so bringing birds and nature back to the center. It's a really great renaturalizing story. So much of what we do with water in cities is like that image on the upper right. It's highly chlorinated, it's energy intensive, it's absent of biodiversity. We can do better. We can think about, rethink water features so that they're good for, again, biodiversity, good for birds, and good for humans as well. Vitoria-Gasteiz, capital of the Basque Country, a similar story. Here, bringing back to the surface a stream, or a small river that was underground in a pipe, creating new habitat, also creating new spaces for human beings, and greening the civic realm, the pedestrian and bicycle network, doing many things at once. I have a few slides again to make the point about the importance of seeing cities through a kind of multi-species lens. Cities can and should be shared habitat. These are images from Austin, Texas, which is another of our partner cities. Some of you know the story of the 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats that come to Austin every summer. They took up residence under the Congress Avenue Bridge, which you see here. It was unexpected at the time, but today now, during every summer day, the end of the night, the bats emerge in large columns and they go off and feed, and hundreds of residents show up to experience this moment of wonder when the bats emerge. Or the story of the smooth-coated otters from Singapore, wonderful story of now 80-something otters that have returned to the city-state, in large part because of the ecological restoration of what you see on the left, the Kalang River that runs through Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park, and its habitat for biodiversity, like the otters. Here's what it used to look like. It was just a flood-controlled channel, but you see in the image on the left now what it was also designed to do. This meandering natural river is also very good at retaining floodwaters. So it's doing multiple things for Singapore. Cities like Edmonton, Canada, another of our partner cities, a long history of planning for this city around ecological connectivity, seeing all the spaces in the city as spaces that should connect ecologically, and looking at the city through the perspective of a bird, for example, black-capped chickadee. So in using planning methods, using tools like circuitscape modeling, where you basically identify those places in a city like a circuit break, where you have a disconnect perhaps in the tree canopy where it might be difficult for that bird to travel through the city. Edmonton has become a bit famous for its wildlife passages, and these are actually required now as part of its design manual. I think there are more than 35 of them. The images on the left are from one of the newer ones. What's interesting also is that when you start to incorporate this kind of connectivity, it has positive effects you maybe didn't fully anticipate. So the numbers of car-wildlife collisions, cars hitting deer, for example, or other animals, has dropped dramatically as a result of these wildlife passages. So I've been a big fan of the idea of designing every city around birds. And so I'll put in a little pitch for the latest book, which is, you see it on the right, The Bird-Friendly City. It's an Island Press book, and we've had some good attention to it, some good reviews and good coverage. It's a Fast Company story on the left. What is a bird-friendly city? It's many different things. It's working to reduce light pollution and voluntary and sometimes mandatory lights out programs during peak migration times. It's thinking about landscaping and tree planting and renaturalizing to create habitats that birds need and want. It's about mandatory bird safe windows. We see in New York and San Francisco now mandates that require windows that have fritted patterns or that are that can be seen by birds. There's many things, but birds are not generally high on our design priority or planning list, and they should be, and they must. So it's part of what we think of as a biophilic city. There's some wonderful synergies between birds and trees. We know in my part of the world we have a lot of oak trees, and for example white oaks that provide habitat for many species of butterflies and moths that produce caterpillars that are the primary food source for nesting birds at this time of the year. You see a blue jay, which is an important native bird here, and they have evolved a beak that is effective at opening the husk of an acorn. These white oak trees especially produce tremendous numbers of acorns. And it turns out that the blue jays plant the acorns. They hide acorns, and many of them they never find or retrieve, so they help to disperse these seeds. And so there's a mutualism between oak trees and birds. I was going to make the case that biophilic planning and design is multisensory. It is, and sound is really important. I wanted to just play one of my favorite sounds. I don't think it's going to work though. Is the sound of an eastern wood thrush. It's a really wonderful sound. This is a species that comes back here in April, migrates here, and it has this incredible flute-like song, and it is a forest bird, and it's usually high up in a tree, and it just fills the forest with this amazing sound. And we want to think of a city as a city where there are many different kinds of voices. Those are not just sounds, those are voices of birds. So for me, that experience of listening to that sound and birds like that thrush are able to sing multiple songs at once. It's really, it kind of just is quite astounding, really. And so many things in the natural world help to evoke in us a sense of awe. And so this is a little bit of a diversion, but I want to put in a plug for Dr. Keltner's new book, Awe. And awe, as he defines it, is the feeling of being the presence of something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world. And what he finds in all of his research, awe can come about from many things. It can be from music, it can be from other kinds of things than nature. But nature is one of those things that is very good at stimulating awe. So one of the studies that he's famous for is getting people to go on walks. And this is a particular study where there was a control group that was walked around a building, looked up at the building, compared their feelings to a group on the left that walked through a forest. So here's one of the final conclusions. After briefly looking up at the trees, our participants reported that they were feeling less entitled and narcissistic. There's something about experiencing nature that puts our lives in perspective. We feel humbled by that experience. We have a lot of evidence that we're more likely to care about other people, to have pro-social behaviors, to be generous when we experience awe. So one of my definitions of what a biophilic city is a city that maximizes moments of awe. And again, not all of them, but many of them that are generated or experienced by as a result of nature. So one story is the return of the whales to the waters of New York City, and these are images from a nonprofit called Gotham Whale. We've done another 8 or 9 minute short documentary film about this, but it's a wonderful story. The humpback whales are coming back in. They're following the menhaden. They're one of their main food sources. They're back because the water is cleaner than it used to be. The idea that you could live in a coastal city, a marine city, where you might catch a glimpse of a humpback whale or a dolphin and have that moment of awe. That's a kind of city that we want and we want to aspire to. So yes, do take a look at that film as well. A bit of a shout out to Mary Cami at the New York Aquarium. She runs a program called the New York Seascape. So part of what we've got to begin to do in cities like New York, any city that is perched on the edge of water, on the edge of a sea, has to begin to expand its concept of nature to incorporate the marine world. And these are, and all of the marine organisms and life that inhabit those spaces. And so Mary likes to talk about New York as an aquapolis, which I think is a clever way of thinking about it or talking about it. So I'm frequently talking about blue urbanism or ocean cities, but the future of cities, a lot of us are living in cities that are, close to water. We've got to connect and care about that, the underwater world that we can't really see as well. So lots of very clever ways that cities are connecting residents to that nature. This is an initiative in a city in Washington State in the US, a program called Pier Into the Night, where there's a screen set up on a public pier, and volunteer divers go into the Puget Sound and they send back what they're finding. They have a GoPro camera and a couple of lights, and there's a naturalist standing at the screen talking to the audience about what they're seeing in real time. Other cities in our network that have been prioritizing the marine world, Wellington, New Zealand, you see here. They have an extensive network of green belts, but they're now talking about blue belts, connecting the harbor and the watery habitats around the city with the more terrestrial habitats, and beginning to think about an integrated land and sea network of spaces and protected areas. They're proud that they're the first city to have undertaken a marine bioblitz, which is an impressive undertaking. And cities are beginning to think about setting goals for renaturalizing, goals for the kind of nature they want to see in this expanded marine habitat. So many cities have set minimum tree canopy standards, you all probably know about Cecil Koninendijk's 330-300 rule. Minimum 3 trees that you see from your window, 30% tree canopy cover, everyone living within 300 meters of a park or green space. We rarely set a canopy for the kelp forest that exists in many places, like just outside, just beyond shore's edge in a city like Los Angeles. So we've got to kind of think more creatively maybe about how the marine world is integrated into that. I'm about at an hour, so I'm going to go very quickly through the rest of my slides and hope that we have a few minutes for questions or comments. Next few slides have to do with the social equity part of what a biophilic city is. I've mentioned already a number of cities that are prioritizing this. And so this is the city of Richmond, the capital of the state of Virginia, has set minimum tree canopy targets for all neighborhoods, but emphasizing tree planting and tree conservation in those neighborhoods of color, those historically underserved and discriminated neighborhoods. But this is pretty common now in many places. Back to Pittsburgh, there's a shade tree commission there. that has just developed an equitable street tree investment strategy that will also be working towards increasing tree planting and tree canopy cover in those underserved neighborhoods. A lot of cities that are talking about this using the language of tree equity. That's really important. A lot of cities, this is Washington, D.C., have established some regulatory framework for protecting existing trees. So in Washington, there is a Tree Canopy Protection Act. So if your tree is over 100 inches in circumference, like the tree on the right, it has a protected status, and there are only certain conditions that would allow you to cut it down. So we're seeing a lot of worry sometimes in cities about what the unintended consequence is of investing in new parks and new nature. A lot of you may know about the High Line in New York. That certainly has served to raise the cost of housing, the price of housing around it, and has displaced people. So there's an interest in many cities to get ahead of that phenomenon. So one of the best stories is the 11th Street Bridge Park in Washington, D.C. that hasn't been built yet, hasn't even been fully funded, but there is an equitable development plan prepared ahead of time to make sure that the housing remains affordable in the neighborhoods around it, that the local residents have the jobs, have the skill sets to fully take advantage of the jobs created and the income generated, and using new affordability strategies like the creation of a new community land trust, for example. Happy to tell you more about that. So in the last minute or two, we do again have a network of cities. We also have thousands of individual members in our network. Several hundred organizations are members. This is Raleigh, North Carolina, last spring, receiving the certificate as this is a city councilman, member of the city council in Raleigh. I usually show up at a celebratory event like this, and happy to share the slides later, but all this information is on the website. But the numbers of cities, again, growing. We hope to expand in more cities in Australia, in India, and African nations, and definitely we'd love to see, by the way, cities in Brazil. And if you are representing a city that might be interested in joining the network, I would love to hear from you. Lots of advantages to being in the network. I won't dwell on all of this, but we do think they're inspiring. Cities are inspiring each other, sharing information, best practices. We're doing a lot of things to capture the good work that cities are doing and the innovations they're undertaking. We have an online journal called Biophilic Cities, all available to read on the website. We are encouraging each partner city to make at least one film about what they are doing. This is a film crew making a film for Edmonton, Canada. And those films end up being part of film festivals, and they got a lot of attention. This is a film festival in Richmond, Virginia. We have lots of collaborations. This is a lecture series with the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. Lots of active partnerships with other organizations. We can't do this work alone, so we would love to partner with you. This is an event that we helped to organize with the World Bank last spring, and we worked on the final report for this Greening Cities Deep Dive, which is available through our website as well. We are part of other networks. There is a network of networks called Natura, and we are part of that network. So we're in the age of urban networks, to be sure. I'm going to skip over and kind of go to the last slide. But we like to think that our network is unique because of this commitment to nature, putting biophilia at the center of it. A lot of things the cities are doing together, including city-to-city exchanges. So when Singapore was interested in adopting some bird-safe design standards, they sent a delegation to San Francisco to learn what that city had done. So I'm getting to the end of the slide. Lots of resources, books, including our newest book, the Handbook of Biophilic City Planning and Design, has recently been translated into Chinese. And we also have a really interesting project looking at nature patterns. And I'm happy I'd love for you to look at our pattern, our kind of international pattern book that we have online. So I'm going to stop here and hope that, again, that you take a look at biophilic-cities.org. And if you have any interest in joining the network as an individual or as an organization, you can do that just by going to the webpage. But we'd love to have anybody, any city, who might be interested in becoming a partner city. We'd love to. We've had discussions over the years with folks in Rio and several other Brazilian cities, but so far no Brazilian cities formally in the network. So I'm going to stop there and hope that you're still with me. And I'm going to stop sharing. Great, you're still there.
Bom, infelizmente o Tim não consegue nos ouvir. Então, eu vou tentar...
I can hear you, actually.
Really? Eu acho que ele escuta a tradução. Ele está escutando a tradução? Me ajudem com isso. Eu escuto o tradutor.
I can hear you.
Ok. Bom, eu vou tentar fazer aquilo que se chama, né? Algo assim, de uma palestra...
Okay.
Bastante complexa, então eu vou passar aqui. Está dando um eco. Isso pode ser diminuído? Não, só tem esse e ele está ligado. Eu prefiro.
Yeah, I can't hear you now.
Ok.
You're going in and out. Can you hear me?
Sim.
Okay. I can hear you, yes.
Ok. Bom, esse percurso que Tim nos mostra, ele parte dessa ideia que lugares que são mais naturalizados... Lugares que são naturalizados tendem a trazer grandes benefícios para os seus moradores. Eu imagino que para essa plateia que eu falo, isso seja um lugar que todos estão, não é? Concordamos com essas questões e o nosso desafio no nosso Brasil é justamente chegar a esses lugares de um modo mais equânime. E não só para os seres humanos, mas também para toda a vida que ali há. Não é? Ele também comentou esse momento sobre a natureza nos ajudar a passar pela pandemia e existir a esperança de todos nós de que a nossa postura frente à natureza pudesse ser alterada por conta dessa experiência. Parece que se alterou mais em alguns lugares e menos em outros, não? O crescimento do design biofílico é algo que é uma pauta. Ele trouxe exemplos, vários exemplos, e foi nos mostrando como esses elementos e atributos foram incorporados através desse chamado desenho biofílico. Primeiro nos edifícios e depois ele passou de fato às cidades, que me parece ser a grande questão, principalmente para nós no Brasil. Não é? O sistema é um sistema integrado, contínuo, justo e inclusivo, esse que fala da biofilia. E há um comprometimento ético nesse desenho também. Novos usos e novas oportunidades foram mostrados, desde tetos, caminhos, todos esses lugares que nós pudemos ver. Mas me parece que uma das questões que me chama a atenção na fala do Tim é quando ele passa disso, que parecem soluções eminentemente técnicas, para uma noção absolutamente subjetiva, que é aquela do AWE, AWE. Vocês notaram isso quando ele começou a mostrar que certos lugares nos tiram o fôlego? São experiências, por exemplo, das baleias ou dos pássaros, do florescimento das árvores. Vocês conseguem perceber que há uma dimensão no nosso desenho que de fato altera a vida. Aumenta a nossa resistência em relação às doenças, faz com que sejamos felizes. Essa não é uma pauta simples de se falar sobre, porque de um modo geral isso não é muito compreendido. Nos chamam de românticos, compreendem? No Brasil, então, quando estamos em uma escala tão complexa de vida, olham para nós e dizem, mas do que você está falando? Eu acho que o que nós podemos fazer é tentar traduzir isso para a nossa realidade, sem perder essa perspectiva. Porque quando as nossas árvores florescem, elas florescem inclusive no inverno, o que é um escândalo para um estrangeiro, não é? Então, quando ele mostra essa perspectiva, ele traz algo de subjetivo para uma pauta que parece técnica, mas ela não é somente técnica. Ela é ética, estética, entendendo estética como qualidade de experiência. No contemporâneo, estética não é o belo. Estético é a experiência e a qualidade que essa experiência tem. E um desenho que, de algum modo, não quer impedir os fluxos da natureza, um desenho atento para esses fluxos, que não quer criar conflitos, mas construir congruência, me parece que é o grande recado de toda essa fala que nós ouvimos. Eu vou tentar abrir, então, para as perguntas, e vocês sabem, nós temos uma tradução, ajudem o tradutor, sim? Vamos fazer perguntas assim, pá!
A gente faz um pacote de perguntas, você acha? Duas, uma? Tá. Tá. A gente vai tentar manter as perguntas num minuto para não sobrecarregar a tradução ali. Eu vou começar aqui, depois você.
A minha pergunta para o Tim é com relação a... Ele apresentou várias iniciativas estruturantes para a construção de cidades biofílicas. Nós sabemos que a necessidade de cidades biofílicas também tem que ser manifestada pela sua população. Então, eu pergunto para ele, nem sei se existe esse conceito, se a educação biofílica traria vamos dizer, esse apelo popular para que as cidades biofílicas ocorram de maneira mais efetiva. Então, gostaria de saber do Tim se ele conhece iniciativas em que há esse conceito, né, de educação biofílica, e o que ele acha de aplicação na educação de plataformas de ciências cidadãs como o iNaturalist, como eBird, como o Snap Plant, como que isso pode ajudar na construção dessa consciência, desde a tenra idade, adolescência e adultos, como que isso pode ajudar na construção dessa consciência biofílica e na construção de cidades biofílicas.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, it's a great question. So how do we begin to cultivate, or how do we begin to sort of foster this connection to nature, this concern about nature, this love of nature, and education is a key element, and early education. And so we have some wonderful stories about cities and projects and schools. So on our website, there's a little film about a charter school where the school is designed in a way where the kids come to the school, they bring their boots and their jackets, and there's not a single building, it's multiple buildings, and they know they're going to have to move around outside all day. And there's a forest where they take their assignments, and there's a working farm. And so they learn about growing food, and they learn about biodiversity, and they learn about birds. And schools can be places like that. Usually they're not. We have wonderful stories of schoolyard greening, renaturalizing. Some school districts in California where we're seeing Miyawaki forests that are being planted. I think the experience of school needs to be much more nature connected, and you need to learn and cultivate a sense of caring about things like birds. Education happens, of course, in many ways. I became a person who cared about nature partly because of my parents. And it was partly my physical environment. I had trees and nature and a city. I was able to be a free-range kid, as they say. And so there was physical environment design, and there are lots of things that made it possible. But having parents that cared about birds, and having a mother who helped me learn the names of birds and helped me watch birds, and maybe it's a grandparent, or maybe it's a neighbor, or someone else in an important person. And there are many organizations that can help this as well. Just to focus on birds, a lot of interest in bird watching, and it takes Audubon and other organizations that can facilitate that learning. The technology, we have a big debate about whether the technology, the digital technology, is taking us away from nature, which it is. But it's also possible that the fact that we all have, a smartphone or an iPhone could actually help us to learn about nature. So there is this app called iNaturalist, and many cities now every spring participate in something called the City Nature Challenge, where that app is used to identify birds and insects and flowers and trees, and becomes a mechanism for learning about nature and participating together in citizen science. So I don't know, there's no one answer, but I think it has to happen at multiple levels, and certainly cities can be a big part of facilitating that kind of literacy and that kind of learning and education, and ultimately fostering a sense of deep caring about and love for that nature, because that's at the heart of biophilia, is the belief that we carry with us this innate love, and it's like a muscle. We have to exercise it. We have to find, we have to create opportunities to express it, to show it, and to demonstrate it, and to practice how that love of nature, if that makes sense.
Existe movimento nos Estados Unidos que se chama Strong Towns, que ele tenta mobilizar as pessoas para desenvolvimento das cidades voltado a resolver problemas fiscais, que talvez seja problema mais básico. E ele tenta acabar com a ideia do subúrbio americano, que não é muito sustentável. Você acha que esse é bom primeiro passo antes de tratar a biofilia da cidade? Ou você acha que dá para fazer as duas coisas ao mesmo tempo? Resolver os problemas fiscais da cidade, talvez que o subúrbio da cidade não é produtivo, não é misto. Dá para fazer isso ao mesmo tempo? Obrigado.
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't hear it all, but yes, we have some conflicting ideas here, right? We as urban planners, we want to create an urban form that's denser and more compact, where our ecological footprints are smaller, where we're walking more, we're able to take transit, ride bicycles, all those things. but at the same time, a lot of us in America and other places are living in suburbs and exurbs, suburbs, and part of the motivation of being in a suburb is a perception that you will have more nature, or you will have more connection to nature. Of course, the irony is that in many suburban environments, you have less nature, and the nature you have might be a backyard or a front yard, but it will be a single species of turf grass. It isn't much nature at all, and it's certainly not biodiverse. So I do think that there are, at this moment in time, there are opportunities for us to renaturalize in all of those spaces. So there are lots of people who are in suburban communities who are taking out their lawn, their turf grass lawn, and putting in a xeriscaped or a native garden. Sometimes it's subsidized by a local government or a city, in part because of water. That's often what the motivating factor is, and particularly in Western U.S. Cities. But for birds, we can make that yard, that backyard, that side yard, that the spaces around us where we live in suburbs can be places for birds. And so that's something we can do in suburbs. But in cities and more denser urban environments, there are many things we can do, other things we can do. And maybe it's installing meadows on high-rise buildings, which is what we're seeing in New York and other cities in the world. So the opportunities will be different. But we do believe that if we have the choice, we want to use land sparingly, and we do want to shift our development patterns into denser, more compact cities. And we do believe the biophilic cities idea is premised on the idea that you can have density and compactness and also nature. It's possible to have those things. And when you look at my examples from Singapore, I think they show that it is possible. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that everyone lives in a 50-story building, but it may be that a 15-story building or a mid-rise or even medium density is a place in Vancouver and San Francisco and a lot of cities that demonstrate that it's possible to renaturalize and have more nature at the same time that you have compactness and density. And in fact, when we think about the desire to shift away from automobiles, that compactness and density will be really helpful. And in an American city, 25 to 40% of a city's space is devoted to cars, parking, roadways. If we can minimize, we can create the conditions for walking, we have the opportunity, at least in theory, to shift a lot of the space in a dense city to nature. And I think that's really promising, and we're certainly seeing it in some cities.
Existe uma cidade na Indonésia, que é a capital, que é Jakarta. Só que existe um movimento para ela ser movida, a capital política ser movida para Nusantara. E eles estão dizendo que essa cidade é uma cidade que vai ser florestal e sustentável. Porém, esse movimento ele negligencia a cidade antiga. E mesmo que você crie uma cidade nova, as pessoas vão se mudar, mas vão ser só as pessoas que têm condições de fazer essa mudança. E você vai deixar uma cidade, as traças, abandonada. Eu não sei se dá para comparar esse tipo de mudança, talvez com o que aconteceu no Brasil, com a mudança da capital para Brasília, que acabou criando cidades satélites em volta. o desenvolvimento foi muito desigual. O que você acha desse movimento da Indonésia?
Yeah, I didn't get a lot of that. So a lot of extraneous sort of noise in the electronics or something. I don't know, but so I didn't hear a lot of that. But I did hear Brasilia, and I have to say I've been to Brasilia many years ago, and it's not unlike a lot of American cities that are designed around cars. And I think we're kind of universally rethinking that. And so I think it's possible to retrofit. And I've just been writing a book about canopy cities, or cities that can make more room for trees and forests. And we have so many wonderful stories. There's a natural history museum in a city nearby that's taking up its parking spaces and converting them to a forest. We can figure out clever ways, and there's a study in Melbourne, Australia, where they've discovered that there's a lot of redundancy. So if you can you can calculate how many parking spaces you might need, it turns out there are many more than we ever need. So there are opportunities in every city, really, to move at once in the direction of being less car dependent and more nature connected. And the more we can walk and bicycle and do things at slower speeds, the more birds we're going to hear, the more things we're going to notice. We're going to be healthier in so many ways. Politicians should pay attention to that. Life expectancy rates go up when we have trees and bicycles and nature around us. So I don't know. I didn't catch all the aspects of your question, but I think it had a bit to do with car mobility.
Sim, cabe mais uma pergunta? Direta? Ok.
Sure.
Uma pergunta última, Tim. Aqui fala a Luciana.
Okay, sure.
So I will speak in English. You might hear me. No. Eu queria perguntar para você algo very simple. In the long run, are you an optimist? You think we can count on biophilic cities in the medium and long-term basis, given the politicians and the planners we have at this very capitalistic and whatever moment in history?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think most of us are profoundly conflicted, and we're profoundly saddened when we look around the world and we see what's happening to every part of the world, every ecosystem. We see we grapple with climate change. We grapple with biodiversity loss. I have two daughters. One is 19, one is 23. What kind of future will they have? I've just mentioned that we've been going through 3-4 days now of unbreathable air, essentially, here in the eastern U.S. And this is just the beginning. So I am saddened, and it's hard not to be a realist. But at the same time, I will say that I am encouraged by the reconnecting we're rediscovering nature. We are, just watching things happen around the world. Just neighbors coming together to save a tree, you know, or to watch fireflies in the summer, or to you know, advocate for something. You know, that there's small things. It seems like they're small things, but I do think this is a movement, and it's a global movement that's gaining traction. Cities are doing remarkable things. You know, so I'm optimistic in that sense that will it be enough? Is it enough to overcome the larger forces of the, you know, global economy and society, and the just kind of profound ways we're disconnected from nature, and so I think I'm optimistic that this transformation is possible. That will we you know, get there in time? I don't know. So I'm not giving you a very good answer, but I think it's the reality of where we are right now. Partly for me, it's tempered by my normally very optimistic self is tempered a bit by just the conditions of life right at the moment. Air quality is worse here than I think in any other place in the world right now, and so it's yeah, we have a lot of big challenges to face. So if we were in the same room, I would want to have a conversation about that, and I wonder how are you optimistic at all? And whatever the answer is, we can't afford to stop, right? We've got to. This work is so important, and we are increasingly an urbanized planet. We need to keep working on a different model of urbanization, a different vision for the future, around which people will rally, I hope. So it's never too late. We can't stop. We can't stop working. So that's one answer. Even if I am pessimistic, that can't stop us from trying to save what we can, to make a better world, to make better cities.
Tim, aqui Luciana, quem fez a pergunta diz que concorda com você, e eu diria que, em nome da organização, nós agradecemos você poder compartilhar sua esperança e resiliência. Sim? Muito obrigada. É isso.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bom, em nome, eu agradeço a presença de todos. Vou passar a palavra agora para a Ormy fechar o evento. É isso, muito obrigada.
Bom, gente, com muita alegria e satisfação, né, que a gente encerra, né, esse, vou chamar de primeiro seminário sobre renaturalização de cidades, né, porque não pensar que podemos ter um segundo logo. Né, quero agradecer primeiramente a todos vocês, né, que estiveram com a gente nesses 3 dias de evento. Né, então, sem vocês esse evento não seria possível. Agradecer ao Conselho de Arquitetura e nominar o pessoal que está ali não aparecendo, mas o Alan, o Alisson, né, todo o setor de comunicação, o Toninho, né, agradecer aos conselheiros, agradecer ao presidente Milton, né, que está conduzindo essa gestão, né, e sempre colocou super a favor, né, e fez, né, todos os esforços possíveis para que esse encontro acontecesse da melhor forma possível. Né, a todos os convidados, né, que a gente entrou em contato, acreditaram nesse projeto nosso e dividir suas experiências, seus estudos com a gente, então foi muito rico. Agradecer a professora Luciana, que eu acho que, assim como o Timothy brilhante fechou o nosso evento com um prelúdio, prefácio, né, sensacional, inspirador, e conduziu essa última palestra de uma maneira muito brilhante. Então, desejo uma boa noite a todos e todas, um bom retorno para aqueles que não são aqui de Curitiba. Esperamos vê-los em breve. Muito obrigado, gente.